Hello, my name's Daisy, and I spent over $400 prepping a Thanksgiving dinner, only to be told, last minute, to pack it all up and bring it to my parents' house instead. They didn't ask. They informed me. Just like always, I cooked, I decorated, I even made napkins with everyone's name, except they didn't make one for me. They laughed, called me the help. My mother slapped me across the face in front of the entire family, and someone filmed it. But you know what? That wasn't the worst part. The worst part is how long I let them treat me like I didn't exist. So tell me, what do you do when the people who raised you are the ones who erased you? 10 days before Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table in Santa Fe with my laptop open, surrounded by sticky notes, grocery ads, and a cup of cinnamon coffee that had gone cold. My budget spreadsheet blinked up at me, a tight row of numbers in pale green cells. I was carefully weighing whether to spend the extra $3 on heirloom carrots or stick with the standard grocery store ones. I chose the heirlooms. This year had to be different. I needed this to be the Thanksgiving they remembered. Not for drama, not for something Callista did. For once, I wanted them to remember me, Daisy, the youngest, not just the helper, not just the one who brought the rolls or washed dishes. I wanted to host, to shine. Just as I was mentally reviewing my shopping list again, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Daisy," she began before I could say hello. "Your apartment's big enough, right?" "For what?" "Well, we thought it might be nice if you hosted Thanksgiving this year. I mean, your sister did it last year and she was exhausted for days. Plus, you're not working full-time right now, are you?" I swallowed the reflexive retort. "No, just freelance baking jobs." "Perfect," she chirped. "It's about time you stepped up anyway." "We'll all pitch in. Callista said she'll bring pies, and Silas is flying in Wednesday." The call ended before I could process what just happened. I looked around my one-bedroom place. It wasn't huge, but I could make it work. The dining table only seated 6, but I had folding chairs and a collapsible table in the closet. I'd figure it out. This was my chance. By that evening, I'd already sketched a floor plan, mapped out oven timing, and started a Pinterest board for rustic chic Thanksgiving decor. I was in it. The next morning, I visited the local co-op first thing. I walked the aisles with my list in hand, placing organic cranberries and fresh rosemary into my cart, adding a few things I hadn't planned. A small honeycomb for the cheese board, pumpkin-shaped butter molds, 2 linen runners with warm orange tones. Everything had to be intentional. Thoughtful. I imagined their faces when they walked into my apartment, warm candles, subtle jazz, the smell of herb-stuffed turkey in the air. When I reached the checkout, the total flashed on the screen, $384.36. My heart stuttered for a second. I tapped my debit card. I dipped into my savings, sure, but this was worth it. Back home, I unpacked everything carefully. My kitchen smelled like cloves and clean countertops. I made a to-do list for each day leading up to the holiday. Bake pies, Tuesday. Brine the turkey Wednesday. Roast vegetables, Thursday morning. I placed sticky notes on the fridge like it was a command center. By Monday night, I was elbow-deep in dough, experimenting with different crust designs for the pumpkin and pecan pies. I took photos of the leaf cutouts I made by hand, texted them to the family group chat. No one responded, but I figured they were busy. Tuesday morning, I drove across town to pick up a special order of monogrammed cloth napkins I'd commissioned from a local seamstress. 12 napkins, each one embroidered with a family member's name in golden thread. Mine said Daisy. I touched the fabric with a weird kind of pride, imagining placing each napkin on the table, showing them they were seen. Callista replied to one of my group texts that afternoon. "Let's hope your mashed potatoes are better than last year's." I stared at her message longer than I should have. Last year, she'd brought store-bought mashed potatoes, forgot to reheat them, and blamed me for not reminding her. I hadn't said a word. This year, I typed, "They'll be perfect." Then deleted it. Then typed, "I'm making them with browned butter and garlic confit." Then deleted that too. Instead, I sent a thumbs-up emoji. By Wednesday, my refrigerator was packed. A 22-pound turkey was resting in a dry brine in the bottom drawer. 3 kinds of pie lined the middle shelf. Everything else, prepared casseroles, marinated veggies, compound butter, was neatly stacked and labeled. That night, I turned on the twinkle lights strung across my windows, dimmed the lamps, and set the dining table for a practice run. I ironed the napkins, folded them perfectly, and arranged them on the plates with printed menus I'd made on Canva. My heart actually fluttered. It felt good to pour myself into something. Then, while frosting the pumpkin pie with a dollop of cinnamon cream, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. Change of plans. We'll do dinner at our house instead. Bring everything over. No explanation. No apology. I read it twice. My hands went still over the pie. I stood there, spatula in midair, as the realization crawled through me. I wasn't hosting. I was delivering. No one had asked if that was okay. No one cared that I'd spent 4 days prepping, spent nearly $400, or that I'd rearranged furniture and bought folding chairs to accommodate everyone. None of it mattered. I dropped the spatula into the sink and wiped my hands on my apron, so that was that. The message was short, blunt, and emotionless. Change of plans. We'll do dinner at our house instead. Bring everything over. I stared at my phone, waiting for a follow-up that never came. I scrolled back up in the group thread, hoping I'd missed something. My name wasn't even mentioned. It was like they were talking around me, as if I were some catering service on standby. 10 minutes later, a private message from Callista popped up. You weren't tagged. Oh, guess it's not that deep. Just follow the plan. Just follow the plan. My jaw clenched. The pie I'd been frosting still sat on the counter, only half finished. My hands hovered above it, motionless. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me, the timer on the oven ticking softly. Everything else? Dead quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful. This one felt like a verdict. I pulled off my apron, folded it slowly, and sat down at the kitchen table. My eyes landed on the printed menus I'd made. They had everyone's names neatly typed, the same golden font I'd used on the napkin tags. There was no plan, not anymore, not for me. Still, I told myself, it's still your food, your effort, it'll show. Maybe when they taste it, maybe that's when they'll get it. Maybe they'd finally look me in the eye and say, thank you. Maybe. I spent the rest of the night packing everything into insulated bags and storage containers. The turkey went into a cooler with ice packs. I wrapped the pies in parchment, then foil, then towels. Every dish was labeled and sealed. I even wrote heating instructions in case they wanted to reheat anything. I made sure everything was perfect, again. Morning came colder than expected. Frost rimmed the edges of my windows, and the desert sky above Santa Fe looked gray and heavy. I double-checked the fridge before locking up. As I hauled the first few bags down to my hatchback, my arms ached under the weight of what used to be anticipation. It took me 3 trips to get everything into the car. Each time I shut the trunk, I told myself this was just a bump. A small change in plans. They still cared. They'd still notice. The drive from Santa Fe to Albuquerque normally took just over an hour, but that morning felt like 3. The landscape that I used to love, the sandstone bluffs, the prickly bushes dotting the flat desert floor, felt far away from where I was emotionally. I wasn't admiring the scenery this time. I was doing a mental roll call of all the ways I'd tried to be enough over the years, and all the ways they made sure I knew I wasn't. Halfway there, I pulled into a gas station off the highway. I sat in the lot with the engine running, hand on the gear shift. The GPS said 42 minutes left. I almost turned around. I really did. I thought about unloading it all back into my fridge, hosting it myself, inviting friends from the bakery co-op, people who might actually be grateful, people who might ask how I was doing before asking for another plate of food. But I didn't. I kept driving. When I reached my parents' house, the driveway was already full. Silas's rental car, Callista's crossover, and a neighbor's SUV lined the curb. I parked a block away and started unloading. No one came out to help. No one noticed me until I was on my 2nd trip. Isolde opened the door just as I was approaching with a tray balanced on each hand. "You're late," she said, stepping aside without offering to take anything. I blinked. Traffic was... "Garage fridge," she interrupted, waving her hand toward the side of the house. "Put the turkey there." No greeting. No hello. Not even a, "How are you?" Just an order. I carried the tray around the side of the house, passing by the tidy shrubs and holiday wreath she'd hung early. The garage door was propped open with a paint can. Inside, a long folding table had been set up. On it were aluminum trays, covered with plastic wrap and labeled with someone else's handwriting. That's when it hit me. They'd already ordered food, probably days ago. My menu had been backup, my food, plan B. I walked back to the car for the third and final trip. I passed Callista at the front door. She smiled like she'd just seen a mailman. "Mom says your turkey's heavy. Hope you brined it right." I didn't answer. I just gave her a tight nod and kept walking. By the time I returned to the garage, Isolde was waiting. She pointed at the remaining space at the edge of the table. "Just leave your stuff there. We've got a few catered things coming too, just in case." Just in case. I stood there for a moment, holding the pie box in both hands. I looked down at the crust, carefully designed with woven lattice and hand-cut leaves. The kind of pie you take photos of. The kind of pie you make for people you love. She didn't even glance at it. I set it down where she pointed. I didn't say a word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew if I opened my mouth right then, something would spill out that I couldn't take back. I turned and walked into the house. My shoes tracked dust on the clean tile. Nobody noticed. It wasn't just my food they pushed aside. It was me. I didn't go back inside right away. After placing the final tray on that rickety folding table in the garage, I stood there, arms folded, staring at the stack of foil-covered dishes like I didn't recognize them. The faint chemical smell of bleach hung in the air, probably from the mop bucket leaning against the dryer. Somewhere behind me, a dog barked in the distance, and the muffled sound of laughter seeped in through the garage door, which someone had lazily left ajar. I looked down and saw my name scrawled in Sharpie on the masking tape I'd stuck onto each dish. Neat handwriting, small letters. Daisy's green beans. Daisy's pecan pie. It looked like I was catering a stranger's party. I might as well have attached a business card. A large recycling bin sat next to the table, overflowing. Right beside it, my grandmother's cranberry chutney recipe, something I'd resurrected and perfected, perched on the edge like it was waiting to be knocked into the trash. I exhaled slowly and reached down to reposition it further onto the table, making sure the lid was sealed. It didn't matter. I already knew nobody would touch it. My hands moved automatically as I made space for the pies. I wasn't thinking anymore, just processing. Then I heard footsteps. Click-clack. The deliberate kind, high heels on concrete. "Whoa, you brought dessert too?" Callista's voice sliced through the quiet like the crack of a snapped wishbone. She stepped into the garage wearing a cream turtleneck and jeans that looked like they'd never been sat in. Perfect hair, perfect smirk. I didn't respond. She breezed past me, glanced at the labels. "Mom already got pies from Sweet Crumb, pecan and pumpkin. Yours look rustic." Her tone carried that fake sweetness, honey with vinegar. I kept my eyes on the food. "They're fresh." "Oh, sure," she said, stepping back toward the door. "Just didn't want anyone doubling up." You know how Dad gets when he thinks we're wasting money. Wasting. Right. As if my hours of work, the ingredients I'd carefully sourced, the crusts I'd chilled and braided and brushed with egg wash, that was all. Excess. She left without waiting for an answer, and the moment she disappeared through the door, I clenched my jaw so tight I felt something shift in my neck. I took a slow breath, then another. I adjusted a foil corner on the stuffing dish that didn't need adjusting. It gave my hands something to do. Inside, I could hear the clatter of plates and the squeak of chairs being moved. The house sounded full, lively, like a family preparing to celebrate. But in the garage, it was cold, dim, forgotten. My fingers started to feel numb. I rubbed them together. But the numbness wasn't just physical. It was something else. A kind of detachment. Like I was watching myself from across the room. Like my arms and legs belonged to someone else. Someone who hadn't just been erased again, but who had helped hand the eraser over. A familiar voice cut through from the kitchen. My mother's. "Make sure you don't mix your stuffing with mine. Your dad hates sage." She wasn't even talking to me directly, just yelling it into the void, assuming I'd hear, assuming I'd comply. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking she could still order me around like I was 12. My silence wasn't passive anymore. It had weight. After a few more minutes, I forced myself to move. I placed the last dish down and backed away from the table like I was stepping away from a gravesite. Then I turned and started toward the house, passing the trash can where someone had casually hung a dish towel. It caught my eye, beige with a screen-printed phrase in cursive across the middle. Thankful, grateful, blessed. I stared at it for a long second, and I don't know what got into me, but I whispered, "But not seen." The words came out like breath I'd been holding too long. I didn't even realize how tightly I was gripping the serving tray until I set it down and saw the imprints of my fingers in the aluminum. Inside the house, the light was warmer. The air smelled of cinnamon and poultry. People were chatting. My cousin's kids were running in circles around the kitchen island. It should have felt like coming home. It didn't. The kitchen buzzed with activity, but no one looked at me. I could have been the person who dropped off food and left. No hugs. No one asked how the drive was, or if I needed help unloading. It was like I'd already been here for hours, just part of the furniture. I lingered in the doorway, unsure where to stand. I didn't want to take up space I clearly wasn't expected to occupy. "Daisy!" my mom called from across the room without even turning her head. "You brought a carving knife, right?" Yeah, it's in the utensil bin." "Great. We'll need it later. Can you make sure it's washed first? We don't want to serve dinner with dusty silver." I nodded once, then caught myself. I hadn't even agreed to be her sous chef. But the reflex to obey was muscle memory by now. My hands already knew what to do before my brain caught up. She went back to arranging the centerpiece, muttering something to Callista about how the sweet crumb pies just look more polished than anything homemade. I left the room before I said something I couldn't walk back. Down the hallway, toward the guest bathroom, I moved quickly, gripping the edges of my sleeves. I needed a moment to collect myself, to not fall apart. Not here, not again. Inside the bathroom, I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the sink. My reflection in the mirror didn't surprise me. Tired eyes, set jaw. A woman who had over-prepared and under-expected and was still, somehow, disappointed. I didn't cry. I didn't want to. But I did stare long and hard at myself and think, you knew this would happen. Why are you still surprised? 10 minutes later, I emerged and headed back toward the kitchen. The voices had grown louder. Someone had opened wine. Laughter rang out like nothing had ever been wrong. I walked back into that warm, noisy room and stood there with my hands empty, waiting for someone to notice I was still here. No one did. My grandmother didn't say anything at first. She just reached for her water glass and gave my hand the gentlest squeeze. I knew she heard me. I also knew she wouldn't try to fix it. That was never her style. She was more of a quiet witness than a rescuer. I'd learned over the years that sometimes silence from the right person could speak louder than all the fake cheer in the world. Dinner was minutes away, and the dining room was a flurry of clinking silverware and rearranged chairs. Callista floated around like she was hosting a gala, adjusting place cards and blowing air kisses to cousins she barely spoke to the rest of the year. My mom moved between the kitchen and dining area, giving orders in a tone that sounded more like she was directing a film than preparing a meal with her family. I stood off to the side, not sure where I was supposed to go. I'd already plated the appetizers and reheated the stuffing I made. Nobody had said anything about it, not good or bad. It was like it just appeared out of thin air. No acknowledgement, no thanks. Then Silas showed up behind me. "Hey, Deus," he said, way too cheerful for a guy who hadn't helped carry in a single dish. "Turn around." I hesitated, but he gave me a playful nudge, so I did. People laughed. At first, I thought maybe someone was making a joke unrelated to me, some inside joke or something about the turkey being dry. But then I saw Callista covering her mouth, and even Aunt Teresa let out a loud chuckle. I reached behind me and felt it, a sheet of paper taped to the back of my sweater. I pulled it off slowly, bold black letters in Sharpie. Catering staff. I stared at it for a second longer than I probably should have. "Oh, come on," Silas said, holding his wine like a trophy. It's funny. I didn't answer. My mom looked over from the other side of the room. Well, she did bring all the food, she said with a smirk. You practically catered the whole thing. More laughter. I walked away before I could let them see my face. In the hallway bathroom, I sat on the closed toilet lid with the door locked and the fan humming above me. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because crying would have felt too expected. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink and tried to remember why I came today, why I hadn't just canceled after they changed the plans, why I'd kept baking even when it was clear I wasn't really invited, just expected. This is your fault, I whispered, leaning in close to the mirror. You thought they'd see you, that this time would be different. My lipstick was fading. I hadn't even noticed until then. I wiped it off entirely and smoothed my hair. If I couldn't be celebrated, I could at least be composed. When I returned, most of the family had taken their seats. I slid into the farthest chair on the long side of the table, the one next to the kids' table, but not quite part of it. My napkin had no name stitched into it. It was just plain white. Everyone else had their gold-lettered initials neatly placed on their plates. Daisy, Callista said as she poured herself a glass of wine. You don't mind sitting over there, do you? We just figured you'd want a little space. I nodded, even though I didn't. Dinner was served buffet style. I waited until everyone had gone through the line before I stood. When I got to the dishes I'd brought, the ones I had cooked for days, the lids were barely lifted. The cranberry chutney was untouched. The stuffing was still full. Meanwhile, the sweet crumb pies were already half gone. I took a spoonful of each thing I made and filled my plate quietly. Then I returned to my seat and ate in silence. Midway through the meal, Mom tapped her spoon against her wine glass. I just want to say a few words before we dig into dessert, she said, standing. The room quieted. I'm so grateful to have my family here. It's rare we all get to be in one place these days. I want to thank Callista for picking up those gorgeous pies and for helping with the table settings. And Silas, we're so glad you flew home. The kids were so excited to see you. There was a pause. My plate felt heavier somehow. Mom smiled and looked around the table, her gaze gliding past me like I wasn't there. Family means everything, she said. And we all play our part. That was it. No mention of the turkey, the sides, the table linens, the embroidered napkins, the days I spent planning. Nothing. I lifted my glass and smiled, the kind of smile you give when you're on autopilot, when your face has learned how to pretend for the sake of everyone else's comfort. Then I leaned toward Grandma Vesper and whispered, if I disappeared right now, I don't think anyone would notice. She squeezed my arm gently and whispered back, I see you. And somehow, that was worse. Because one person noticing made the rest of them choosing not to. Undeniable. Grandma's hand stayed on mine just a second longer than usual. That small pause meant more than any speech anyone had given at the table all night. But I didn't let my expression change. I kept the polite smile glued on my face like wallpaper, thin and easily peeled. The clatter of forks and the hum of small talk filled the room as dessert plates were passed around. No one looked in my direction. I was still at the far end of the table, somewhere between the adults and the leftovers. When someone asked for more whipped cream, it wasn't me they turned to, even though I'd made it from scratch. Without thinking, I stood and began clearing plates. Nobody asked me to. Nobody stopped me either. Callista let out a loud sigh, dramatically pushing her chair back. I'm stuffed, she said, stretching like a cat in a sunbeam. I literally can't move. Mom chimed in, waving Silas off as he half-heartedly made a show of standing. Sit down, honey. Daisy's got it. She's always been good with the kitchen stuff, she added, as if I were a dishwasher that just happened to come with the house. I gathered empty glasses and soup bowls, stacking them with practiced precision. My feet moved on autopilot, the same way they did when I was younger, scooping mashed potatoes onto plates, fetching more rolls, wiping spills without being asked. No one noticed then either. The kitchen was quieter, though not by much. The sink was already half full. I set the plates gently down and turned to reach for the silverware. That's when it happened. A spoon slipped from the stack I was carrying. It hit the floor with a sharp metallic clink that echoed a little too loudly against the tile. From across the room, I heard the familiar snap of my mother's voice before I even looked up. "Daisy!" I froze. She came around the corner, fast. "For heaven's sake!" she hissed, bending to pick it up. "Don't start making a mess. It's not like you're going to get married off with those clumsy hands." She said it low enough that most of the table couldn't hear, but one guest did. Aunt Lydia, who was loading pie slices onto dessert plates, paused, glanced at me, then quietly returned to her task. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I looked back at my mother, and something in me twisted. That comment should have made me flinch. It used to. But now? Now it landed differently, like a dry match on wet wood. I turned back to the sink without replying. The sponge was rough in my hands, the water too hot, but I kept scrubbing. I finished all the plates and wiped down the counter. Afterwards, I slipped out the side door. The back porch was cold, the kind of chill that seeped through sleeves and settled into bones. I welcomed it. The sky was heavy with clouds, the porch light casting a yellow glow across the dead leaves scattered near the steps. I sat down on the wooden bench and pulled my phone from my pocket. There were no missed calls, just a text. "Lauren, how's the circus?" I stared at it for a long time before typing. Still the clown. Still invisible. No reply came. And honestly, I didn't expect one. That wasn't what I needed anyway. I needed space to breathe. The back door creaked open, and I looked up, expecting another round of fake concern, or worse, Callista pretending to care. But it was Marlo. She was my mom's cousin, technically an aunt, though we never used that word for her. She lived alone, worked at a library, and never married. She didn't talk much, but when she did, people usually listened. Marlo didn't say anything at first. She sat beside me, pulled her cardigan tighter, and looked out into the yard like we were watching something worth seeing. "I saw how they treated you," she said softly after a moment. "It's not right." My throat tightened. I didn't respond. She added, "You know that, right? That it's not you." The lump in my chest swelled, and I felt my vision blur. Not because of what they'd said, but because someone finally saw it. Saw me. "I keep thinking if I do enough, maybe they'll—" My voice broke. "Maybe they'll finally see me." Marlo exhaled slowly. "Sometimes, the only thing people see is what makes them feel better about themselves. And you. You've always made them uncomfortable because you remind them of everything they're not." We sat there for a while in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then she turned to me. "You don't have to keep proving yourself, Daisy. You've already done more than enough." I let that sit in my chest like warm tea on a cold morning. After a few more minutes, I whispered, "If they do one more thing, I'm done." Marlo didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "Then maybe it's time they learn what done really means." I didn't reply. But something shifted in me, quiet and small, like the first creak of a door that's been locked too long. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew it wouldn't be the same thing I'd always done. The hum of conversation still buzzed in the living room when I stepped back inside. My fingers were stiff from the cold outside, but I barely noticed. Marlo's words echoed in my head like a quiet mantra. Maybe it's time they learn what done really means. I moved through the house deliberately, back toward the dining room where the dessert table had been set up. The plates were mostly empty now, except mine, of course. My pecan pie sat untouched, the whipped cream starting to melt and run. The cranberry chutney hadn't even been opened. As I reached to cover one of the trays, I noticed a folded receipt tucked between the pages of the cookbook I'd brought. The book had been left on the counter, flipped open to the stuffing recipe, Grandma's original, the one I'd tried to honor, the one Mom had said Dad didn't like anymore. I hadn't realized the receipt was there. Before I could grab it, Isolde appeared. She reached past me and plucked it out with a little smirk. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it slowly. My stomach turned. She scanned it once, then again, eyes widening just slightly, then narrowing with judgment. "You spent this much? On groceries?" She held it up for Callista to see. "Honey, people throw whole weddings for less." Callista laughed. Not the light kind, but the sharp, mocking kind. It's not about how much you spend, it's the thought that counts. And the presentation. My mouth opened slightly, but I said nothing. The table had fallen silent just enough for everyone to hear. And yet no one said a word in my defense. I stood there, holding a serving spoon, as if it were a microphone that had betrayed me. I turned away from them, walking slowly toward the hallway to set the spoon in the sink. Then I heard someone call out, "Let's get the family photo before everyone disappears." I paused. That voice, chipper and shrill, belonged to Aunt Crystal. Every year, she organized the Thanksgiving photo, one with the whole family standing in front of the fireplace, smiling like a postcard. It was tradition. Tradition had never included me, not really. Still, I found myself drifting toward the group gathering near the fireplace. Callista stood front and center, adjusting her hair, pulling Silas into the middle. Isolde took a spot on the left side of the couch, holding a glass of wine like a prop. Everyone else shuffled into place as names were called. Silas, move closer. Callista, fix your collar. Grandma, sit right here. Nobody called for me. I waited. Maybe someone would notice I wasn't in frame. Then, just as I took a step forward, ready to quietly slide in, someone muttered from behind the camera. "Hold on, we're doing immediate family first." Immediate. The word rang out like a slap. I stood frozen, one foot in the air like a child caught sneaking into a room she wasn't allowed in. I scanned the faces. No one was looking at me. Not even Grandma this time. She was too focused on keeping her balance on the edge of the ottoman. And then, something snapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was clean, like when you finally tear the tag off a shirt you've worn too long. "I am immediate family," I said, voice low but steady. "I just forgot you all didn't see it that way." For a second, no one moved. The camera didn't click. The smiles stayed frozen in place, awkward and half fake. Silas cleared his throat. Someone coughed. Aunt Crystal looked down at her phone. Callista muttered under her breath, "So dramatic." I didn't bother to respond. Instead, I turned around and walked toward the hallway without saying another word. I passed the buffet table, now a mess of crumbs and empty platters. I grabbed my purse from the floor near the coat rack and pulled out my phone. With shaking fingers, I opened the shared family album. Every Thanksgiving photo from the past 10 years was in there. I scrolled through them. In half, I was missing. In the others, I was blurry in the background, usually mid-task, pouring drinks, clearing plates, reaching for something out of frame. I selected my photos, every one I'd ever uploaded. Tap, 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 delete. One by one, I removed myself from their digital scrapbook. No one came after me. No one asked where I was going. The photo eventually got taken. I know, because later, Callista would post it with a caption, "Thankful for real family." I was still standing in the hallway when I saw the notification. I didn't cry, not then, but I opened my notes app and typed one sentence, "You don't belong where you're only needed, not wanted." Then I clicked the lock button and slid the phone into my pocket. I stood there for a moment longer, hand resting against the doorframe. This time, I didn't ask myself if I was being too sensitive. I didn't wonder if maybe I'd misunderstood. Because I hadn't. I hadn't made it 3 full steps toward the front door when I heard him. "Whoa!" Silas called out from the kitchen. "Catering's closing early?" The laugh that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it wasn't harmless either. That tone he used, the kind that only the oldest sibling gets away with. I knew it too well. I didn't stop walking, but I did glance over my shoulder. He had a red Solo cup in one hand and a half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie in the other. "She's just the help, folks," he added to no one in particular. "But man, that's stuffing." More laughter, more heads turning, not toward me, but toward him. I walked back into the kitchen and pulled open the drawer where I'd stashed the containers I brought from home, the ones I hadn't even unpacked yet. I started stacking the ones that were still sealed, wiping off condensation from the lids. My hands were steady, movements sharp, focused. I opened the fridge and reached for my pie. The pecan was still untouched. I placed it carefully into the insulated bag. Next went the cranberry chutney, then the potatoes. No one tried to stop me. No one offered help. I was halfway through wrapping the serving spoons in a clean towel when I noticed something on the end of the table, a stack of cloth napkins. I walked over, curious more than anything else. My name was the first one I looked for, out of instinct, out of some small delusional hope. Callista, Silas, Isolde, Grandma Vesper, even Uncle Jim and his new wife, who had been dating Mom's best friend 6 months ago. All of them had monogrammed napkins, stitched in gold. Mine wasn't there. I scanned again, slower this time, then flipped one over just to be sure. Nothing. I turned to my mother, who was walking by with a tray of dessert forks. "Did mine get lost?" I asked, holding up one of the blank napkins. Isolde barely slowed. "We only had 12. She set the tray down and adjusted a spoon on the edge. "It's just a napkin, Daisy." That was the moment. The napkin weighed nothing in my hand, but somehow it was heavier than anything I'd carried that day. Heavier than the stuffing, heavier than the turkey, heavier than the years of trying to belong. I folded it once, then again, placed it on the table. Then I grabbed my coat off the back of the chair. "Seriously?" Callista called from the living room. "Just because of a napkin?" I turned. "No," I said. Because I finally realized none of this was ever for me. It came out smooth, steady, like I'd rehearsed it. But I hadn't. That line had lived in me for years. It just finally found a door. The room quieted. Silas looked up from his drink. Aunt Crystal froze mid-sip. Even the youngest cousins stopped bouncing around the TV. Everyone looked at me. Really looked. For once. Then, from the dining room, a creak of movement. And Grandma Vesper stood, slowly but deliberately, with both hands on the arms of her chair. "She's the only one," she said, her voice a bit raspy but firm, "who brought food, who cleaned, who showed up." A fork dropped onto the tile with a loud clink. No one moved to pick it up. "She's the only one who got nothing in return," Vesper added, "and you all know it." It wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. My throat felt thick, but I didn't cry. I didn't move either. Not until Vesper sat back down and reached for her water glass like nothing had happened. I turned back toward the front door. I zipped up my coat, slung the insulated bag over my shoulder, and placed the last wrapped dish in the reusable tote. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard it, Mom's voice, sharp and clear. "You walk out now," she said. "Don't bother coming back for Christmas." I didn't turn around. "I won't." The door clicked behind me. The air outside was sharp, cutting through the layers of cotton and fleece like a blade. I didn't rush to the car. I moved slowly, deliberately, my boots crunching over the gravel. The street was quiet. No traffic, no music. Just the echo of what had just happened, chasing me down the driveway like a shadow. I unlocked the hatchback and carefully set the bags inside. The trunk closed with a dull thud. I sat in the driver's seat, keys resting in my lap, my hands still wrapped around the wheel, but not turning it. The porch light was still on behind me. I could see silhouettes moving through the curtains. None of them looked toward the window. The silence in the car felt different than the silence in the house. This one didn't expect anything from me. It didn't blame me. It just held me. I finally started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, and as I pulled away from the curb, I whispered to myself, "This isn't running away. This is finally going." But it wasn't the last thing she said to me that night. The air bit at my cheeks as I stepped outside. My hands were still trembling, not from the cold, but from the pressure inside me, the kind that builds in silence until it starts screaming. I reached the car, popped the trunk, and began rearranging the containers I'd packed with so much care earlier in the evening. My breath fogged in the glow of the porch light behind me, and I knew I was supposed to leave. I wanted to leave. But the wine. I'd left 2 bottles in the kitchen, behind the bread basket and beside the little cheese board I'd put together that no one touched. My body moved before I could stop it. I turned around, marched up the path, and pushed the front door open. It was quieter than before. A few guests had left. The fireplace was flickering, its soft glow casting long shadows across the living room. Most people had retreated to their conversations in corners or toward desserts. I stepped into the kitchen and spotted Isolde at the island, pouring Pinot Noir into tall-stemmed glasses like nothing had happened. Her tone was light, almost cheerful as she handed a glass to one of Dad's work friends. Then she saw me. Without missing a beat, she grabbed the unopened bottle from the counter, thrust it toward me, and said, "Since you're still playing waitress, pour for the rest, would you?" My fingers curled around the bottle. I stared at her. The room didn't freeze, not at first. It kept moving, humming. But I had stopped. I stood there in my boots, coat half zipped, and for a moment, I felt like I was hovering above myself, watching from the ceiling. I lifted the bottle. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from too many emotions trying to escape at once. And then it happened. The bottle slipped from my fingers, not violently, not dramatically, but just enough to twist and slide out of my grip. It hit the edge of the counter before crashing against Isolde's pristine cream-colored dress. A dark red bloom spread across her chest, dripping down the lace like a wound. Gasps echoed around the room. A hush swept in, smothering the noise like a heavy blanket. For a second, we just stood there, me staring at her wine-stained blouse, and her looking down at it like she couldn't quite believe it was real. And then her hand flew. It cracked across my cheek with such force that my teeth clicked together. The sound was unmistakable, sharp, clean, cutting through the tension like a whip. Time slowed. I didn't fall. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, cheek burning, eyes locked on hers. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice full of venom, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've embarrassed this family enough." That's when I noticed Aubrey, standing by the doorway with her phone still up, still recording. She didn't lower it. She didn't say anything. But her eyes met mine, wide, stunned. I took one step back, then another. I turned to leave. No one moved to stop me, not even Vesper. But as I passed the edge of the dining table, I heard a chair scrape back, and then, slowly, the sound of another. Vesper stood up, leaned against her cane, and for the second time that night said something I would never forget. "Now everyone sees what she's lived with." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any screaming match could have been. I walked straight to the door, past faces frozen in mid-bite, past Callista's stunned expression and Silas's blank stare. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand beside my bed. I hadn't slept. I'd just laid there, fully clothed, eyes open in the dark, the echo of that slap still fresh in my bones. The screen lit up with a notification. "Holiday horror, family drama goes too far, 3.2 M views." Aubrey had uploaded the video. The thumbnail showed my mother, mid-slap, with red wine bleeding across her chest like a badge of cruelty. The caption read, "You won't believe what this woman did to her daughter at Thanksgiving." By lunchtime, it was over 4 million views. Comments flooded in, some furious, some stunned, some too real. That's abuse, plain and simple. You can feel the years of silence in that girl's face. I hope she never steps foot in that house again. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to. The phone rang 4 times that day. I didn't answer. By the 5th, I blocked Isolde's number. Then I removed myself from the family group chat. One tap, gone. By nightfall, I was looking at rental listings in Oregon. Aubrey messaged me once. "I didn't plan to record that, but I'm glad I did. You deserve better. Whatever you need, I've got you." I thanked her. That was all. 2 days later, I got a text from Callista. "Mom is a wreck." "You really did this for attention?" I didn't respond. The local church council had convened a meeting about public representation. I knew this because Aunt Lydia forwarded me a newsletter Isolde had once bragged about being featured in. Now, it just had a note. "Isolde Morris will be stepping down temporarily." Temporarily. Sure. The same afternoon, I received a message, just a text, from Isolde. "The internet will forget, but you'll always be my daughter." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I blocked the number for the second time. and whispered, "That's the part I'm trying to heal from." A month later, I was standing barefoot in my new kitchen, watching steam curl off a tray of scones I'd just pulled from the oven. Outside the wide bay window, the Oregon coast stretched out beyond a patch of wild grass and a weathered fence. Gulls circled low. The air smelled of salt and rosemary. The cottage was small, 2 bedrooms, a galley kitchen, and just enough space for a reading nook and a fold-out table I used for baking classes on the weekends. I rented it furnished from a retired teacher who now spent most of her time in Arizona. The first night I slept there, the wind howled like a storm dragging its claws across the roof, but somehow, it felt like the safest sound I'd heard in years. By the second weekend, my first pop-up baking class was fully booked. A dozen locals showed up with aprons and notebooks, some dragging in their own mixer bowls, others just curious. I taught them to laminate dough, fold pastry, trust their hands again. By the end of the session, everyone left with something warm wrapped in parchment, and a little more softness in their faces. One woman lingered behind, wiping her hands with a dish towel that had seen better days. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. What made you move out here?" I paused. I could have said it was for the view, the air, the quiet, but that wasn't it. "Some traditions need to end," I told her, "for better ones to begin." Her eyes welled instantly. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in years," she whispered. Maybe it was my turn to listen. She didn't stay long after that, just nodded once, gently, and left with her banana bread. That night, I sat at my little table and lit a single candle. It wasn't fancy, but I made soup from scratch, and I used one of the monogrammed napkins I'd made the year before. I had kept mine. Daisy, stitched in gold thread. It rested neatly in my lap. The next day, my phone rang. Marlo. She didn't call often, which made it mean more when she did. "I figured you should know," she said. "The church board made it official last week. Isolde's no longer on the council. She didn't take it well." I didn't ask how bad it was. Marlo continued. "Callista moved to Denver, said she needs a reset." "Silas? Well, no one's seen him online since the video. Guess even he has limits." I smiled, more at the silence that followed than the words themselves. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "You're welcome," she replied, then added, "You made it out, Daisy. You really did." That night, I sat down and wrote a letter to my mother. Not to send, just to get it out. It started with, "You hurt me for years, not because you hated me, but because you never saw me." I wrote about the stuffing, the towels, the photo I was left out of. I wrote about all the times I had waited for someone to say I mattered, and how I eventually realized they never would. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in a small box where I kept other unsent things. A card from Dad's birthday that never got mailed, a bracelet I'd made for Callista once, still wrapped in tissue. On the last Saturday of November, I hosted something I called the Gratitude Gathering. It wasn't Thanksgiving, not exactly, but it carried the same bones. My students came, a few neighbors, even the woman whose daughter hadn't called. Everyone brought a dish, some store-bought, some lovingly made. We pushed together the folding tables, laid out mismatched chairs, and passed the wine freely. At each place setting, I'd stitched simple napkins with names, first names, not because I needed to prove anything this time, but because it felt good to give people something that said, "You're here. I see you." There was one for everyone, including me. When the night wound down and the last guest left, I cleaned up slowly, humming under my breath. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of the dishwasher and the wind through the window crack. I stepped out onto the back porch, wrapped in a sweater and holding a cup of tea. The ocean stretched out before me, gray-blue and endless. I watched it for a while, letting the air carry away the last pieces of the night. Then, almost without thinking, I said out loud, "They may never say sorry, but I don't need it anymore." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Sometimes walking away isn't the hardest part. It's realizing you were never really invited to stay. Daisy's story reminds us that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect your peace? What helped you finally choose yourself? If this story resonated with you, Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories of strength, healing, and quiet revenge. Your next chapter might start here.